You know, when it comes to growing a garden, whether we're growing vegetables or herbs or even flowers, a lot of times people are so intimidated to grow from seed. And I was too. When I first started gardening, I would buy all my plants. In fact, my very first garden that I was serious about was, let me think, it would have been in 2013. So 13 years ago. And we were living in a neighborhood. It was before we lived here on our farm. And I decided I wanted to grow food. Now, I had gardened a little bit before, very unsuccessfully, but I had been watching YouTube videos. You know, we get on YouTube University, and I had been so inspired by some of the gardeners on here. And so I really wanted to give it a go. So that year, I talked Josh into borrowing a tractor from a friend and tilling up a huge garden. And I think it was like 20 by 50. I mean, this thing was massive. And then I went to Lowe's and I hit the garden center and I brought home all kinds of plants. To tell you the truth, I spent money I didn't have to spend on plants at the time, but I justified it because in my mind, this is money I won't have to spend at the grocery store later. The only problem was that only works if you know how to take care of all of those plants that you just bought and you know how to get them to the point where they produce fruit. I had no idea. So I brought home hundreds of dollars worth of plants, put them all in this big freshly tilled garden, and I walked away. Actually, I set a sprinkler up before I walked away. And we would turn the sprinkler on once a day, but other than that, I ignored that garden. I thought gardens are supposed to just grow. Like, this isn't something that I need to be out there doing things every day. You plant it, and then you come back a few months later and you collect all the things that you harvest, right? So not right. I had it so wrong. But in my little mind, that's how it was going to work. So I probably don't even need to tell you the rest of the story because you already know what happened. By the time the end of summer comes, I walk up to my prized garden and guess what I find? Pretty much nothing. It is a jungle of grass and weeds and not a lot of vegetables. I think I harvested maybe 2 or 3 squash, a cucumber, that was bitter, by the way, and a handful of green beans. No tomatoes, nothing exciting. And for all the money that I had spent on that garden, I didn't even get $20 worth of fresh produce from it. And to make matters worse, back then we didn't know anything about permaculture or soil, but we had tilled that garden up. And when we did that, we introduced weed seeds that had been deep in the ground for decades. And now they were on the surface, so we had a mess to contend with. Now, over the years, I've learned a few things, and my garden doesn't look like that anymore, and I don't garden like that anymore. I have learned that if you are going to have a garden, you have to be in your garden. A garden doesn't take care of itself. You can't just plant it and forget it. A garden has to be a place you visit on the regular. Whether you're growing vegetables, herbs, flowers, anything, you have to be in your garden. The garden needs a gardener. So when I first started getting serious about it, we moved to our homestead, and the first year I grew plants from the store again. But this time I did some research and I started to learn how to take care of them, and we had a little success. Not a lot, but a little. And then the next year, I really decided I wanted to learn to use seeds. Growing from seed is honestly one of the best things you can do to save money on gardening and on food. So let me tell you what I mean. Here I have a little bag full of tomato seeds, and we'll just use one of these as an example because tomatoes are really what got me growing from seeds in the first place. So I noticed when I would go to like the local nurseries and greenhouses to buy tomatoes in my area, you pretty much can only find 2 or 3 varieties. Everybody's growing beefsteak, Better Boy, or Park's Whopper. Those are the 3 we see everywhere. Occasionally, if it's like more of a farm to table situation, or like a few of our local farms will grow Cherokee purple tomatoes, but that's pretty much it. So when I started geeking out over gardening and seeds, and I made the mistake of buying my first seed catalog from Baker Creek Seed Company, oh my goodness, I started to dream, and I realized there are all kinds of tomatoes. Like, you can get them in every size, shape, color imaginable. And so I started geeking out on tomatoes, but if I wanted to try these varieties, I was gonna have to grow them myself because nobody here grows them. And so that is how I became a bit obsessed with seed starting and how this greenhouse came into existence. It was all in pursuit of a fancy tomato. So the thing about seeds is they save you a ton of money because let's do a cost comparison. If I were to go to my local greenhouse or nursery and I were to buy a tomato plant in a cup, one tomato plant here averages $5.99, so $6. I might can find one for $5 if I buy it from a farm instead of like a big box store greenhouse, but $5 to $6 for a plant. Now, if I buy this pack of seeds, this pack of seeds contains 50 seeds, and this pack of seeds was $3, okay? So for $3, I get 50 seeds, which turns into, let's say they don't all germinate. Let's say we get at least 40 tomato plants. So for $3, I now have 40 tomato plants as opposed to $5 for one tomato plant. But the savings does not stop there because these are heirloom seeds. And what that means is these seeds can be saved from generation to generation. So when you use heirloom seeds, you only have to buy a variety once and you'll have it forever. So this is a greeny Cantrell tomato. So once we grow these, I will take the best tomato off the plant and I will save that tomato for seed. And I'll save the seeds and let them dry, and that's what we will plant with next year, and I'll never buy this again. Now, the only thing you'll have to buy once you get good at seed saving is your hybrid seeds. And a lot of people are scared of hybrid seeds, so let's talk about it for a second. Heirloom seeds are seeds that have been saved for generations. Hybrid seeds, on the other hand, are seeds that have been created, designed, modified to work for your region. So, for example, maybe they were bred to increase resistance to drought if you live in a dry area. Maybe you want a variety of collard greens that can withstand the heat without bolting. So you choose something like a Georgia Southern collard that's a hybrid. Maybe you want a tomato that tends to not split as easily because you live somewhere really wet and you get a lot of rain. So you might want a hybrid variety that has been bred for resistance. For us, we live in an area where blight is a huge problem in the summer. When July's humidity rolls in, my tomatoes suffer every single year because of blight. And it's something that's just going to happen. It's part of where we live. So along with my beautiful heirloom tomatoes, I also grow some hybrids that are blight resistant. So if it's a bad year and the blight comes in, it will absolutely wipe out my heirlooms, but my hybrids might stand a chance. So hybrids are not GMO. They're not genetically modified in the sense of like frankenfood that we're afraid of. They are just, basically they take two parent plants with desirable qualities and they breed them together. So they might take a flower from this bush and pollinate it with pollen from this bush to create a fruit that has qualities of both parents. That is what hybrid seeds are. So there's no need to fear them, but you do need to understand them and know their place so that you're not planting something and then trying to seed save. Now, if you would save seeds from a hybrid plant and try to plant those next year, it would probably grow, but it won't produce fruit that is true to the parent fruit. So with hybrids, you get one good generation of the shared good qualities, and then it sort of starts to go downhill. So you don't want to save seeds from hybrids. You only want to save seeds from heirlooms. So with that in mind, you may want to design your garden with a little bit of both. That's what I do. So when you're starting things from seed, you're going to save a lot of money. You'll have eternal seeds if you choose heirloom varieties to grow from. But there are some tricky things that can happen when you grow from seed. There's some challenges, And honestly, if you're wanting to grow herbs from seed, it can be even more difficult. Herbs are the most difficult thing to grow from seed. But don't let that discourage you. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you need to know a few tricks. So let me show you some of my baby herbs over here, and I'll give you some tips to help you grow herbs from seed too. So the first thing you need to know is that herb seeds are usually tiny. I mean, all seeds are small, but when you're growing herbs, you need to be prepared for teeny, teeny, tiny seeds. So, for example, this is rosemary. Let me show you what a rosemary seed looks like. So, a lot of people have never seen what these teeny, tiny little seeds look like. This is rosemary seeds. So they're so little. Each seed produces a whole rosemary plant, okay? So in this tiny envelope, I have enough rosemary to probably last my entire life, because rosemary will grow for years and years once it's established. So every year I sow a couple more rosemary plants to just add on our property in different places. This is one of the herbs I use a lot. It's one that I make a lot of hair oils and skin oils out of. So we always grow rosemary. Now, when I seed start herbs, you can do this a couple of ways. One thing you can do is you can get the little cell trays, and you can do one seed per tray and give each plant room to sprout. But if you don't have the little cell trays, don't go out and spend a fortune on them. Instead, you can use cups. And let me give you a good example of this. Here, this is marshmallow that I'm growing, not like the fluffy kind you use for a campfire, but the herb plant marshmallow. Marshmallow root is wonderful for stomach issues. It's good for anything respiratory. Marshmallow is a wonderful plant to keep in your herb garden. So in this little cup, do you see how many of those are growing in there? So instead of doing individual seed cell trays, I planted, I'm going to say there might be 20 little marshmallow plants in this one cup. You can totally do it that way. No stress. We're not stressing. But what we are going to have to do is when these get a little bit bigger, when we're looking for like 4 to 6 leaves on each little plant. That tells us that we're ready for the next step. When they get to that size, I'm going to actually pull these out of the cup, very gently tease them apart, and give each little marshmallow plant its own cup to get bigger before it goes into the garden. So it's a process, and they kind of get to graduate to a bigger cup when they're ready. But this saves me some space in my little greenhouse, because I can start 20 in one this size, or I can start 20 in something this size. And you can see, space-wise, in a small greenhouse, it pays off to do it this way. And by the time these are big enough to separate out into their own cups, most of the veggies in here will already be in the garden, because a lot of my veggies that are currently growing in here are things that can withstand cold weather, like cabbage and broccoli and kale, and those are going to go out in the garden in the next like 7 to 10 days. We are almost there on those. So you can start lots in one little cup, and then you can divide them up. Now when you're starting herb plants from seed, another thing you need to know is that you got to be patient. It might take a while. So if you've grown vegetables from seed, you're probably used to seeing some little sprouts pretty quickly. Most vegetables germinate in like 7 to 14 days. It's not that long of a process. However, with herbs, sometimes it can take up to 4 to 6 weeks. And then some herbs have weird rules around how you start them. For instance, some herbs need something called cold stratification, things like echinacea, and all that means is the seeds need to survive a cold winter, and then when it warms back up, it indicates inside the seedling it's time to bust open and grow. And if you don't give them a cold spell, if you save the seeds and you just take them inside your warm house all winter, and then you keep them warm and then put them in warm soil in the spring, they may never sprout. And the issue is they never had a chance to do what nature naturally would have done. If that plant had dropped those seeds into the soil, they would have lived through a winter. So you have to create that sort of winter in an artificial way, and you could do that just by popping those seeds in the refrigerator. So there are lots of little tools and tricks that can help you with herb seeds, but the big thing is you've got to remember that herbs each have their own process. And so as you're growing them, you know, you've got to pay attention to what the seed packet says. Whereas with like my veggies, I can pretty liberally just sow those without worrying too much about it. With herbs, you really got to pay attention. So don't forget that. I also want you to remember that not all herbs have to be started in little cups ahead of time. In fact, a lot of herbs you can plant the seeds directly into your garden and they'll do really, really well. So a few of those that you could try that are so easy, just plant your seeds right in the garden. Try cilantro or calendula. That one is a medicinal superhero, and all you got to do is scatter those seeds in the soil, put just a light layer over the top, pat them down, water it really, really well until they sprout, and you'll have calendula. And the beautiful thing about calendula is it self-seeds, meaning it flowers and then it drops its own seed. And so once you put calendula somewhere, you'll probably have it there forever. It will just come back every single year. So the thing is though, you can also get a head start by planting even those plants in cups. So for instance, I would typically sow my calendula seed in the garden here in May, once we're past our frost date. But to get me a little bit of early calendula for teas, I've actually started some here in the greenhouse that I'll be ready to harvest probably in April. And so just seed starting inside gives you a head start, but it's totally not necessary. You could plant them right in the garden. So like this right here, this is chamomile. Look how pretty. And with chamomile, you sort of just sow the seeds with a scatter method, and I did the same thing in this cup. Now I could totally divide this out like we were talking about earlier with the other one, and I could divide it and make multiple plants, but with something like chamomile, I tend to just plop that whole thing in the garden and let it spread and take over. So you want to know your individual plants and kind of their growing habits and how they spread. But again, if you're a beginner, we're not stressing. Just put it in the garden and see how it grows. The thing with growing from seed is even if it's a disaster, you're out $3. So it's a little bit of a low risk way to experiment without spending hundreds of dollars on plants where if they die, you're completely disheartened. If you're growing from seed, if it doesn't go well, you got a whole pack of seeds you can just try again. So there's some major benefit to that. Look at my cute little chamomile. Let me show you a few other things I'm growing while we're here. When it comes to growing herbs, there are literally hundreds of varieties. Like you're never gonna run out of new options to try and learn and use. This year, this whole section right here, these are herbs, and a lot of these are brand new herbs that I've never grown before. Some of them have already sprouted. Some of them we're still waiting to see even if they will. It's all an experiment. So remember, take the pressure off yourself. It's okay if it doesn't go well. We're going to learn something from this. So let me just show you a few of them. So this is clary sage. Clary sage is a wonderful herb for hormones. It's really good for period cramps for the ladies. And it is really wonderful in a steam pot, like for anxiety. It's a good one to inhale. So you would boil it and stand over the steam and inhale it. Clary sage. I have one clary sage plant in the garden that we've had going for about 3 years, but we're going to add probably 10 more clary sage plants this year. We have, let's see, motherwort. Here's a good one. Motherwort is, we do have some motherwort already, but this is another one I'm expanding how much of it we grow. Motherwort will come back year after year once it's established, at least here where I live. But this one is good for hormones, the motherwort, anything postpartum. But motherwort is also a really good cardiac tonic. It's good for heart things. And as you know, my sweet Josh has heart issues. And so I grow a lot of cardiac things for him just to kind of keep him well. Now, I got to tell you a story about this one, y'all. This is Tulsi. I know y'all know what Tulsi is. But the fact that this sprouted is such a win for me. I have been trying to grow Tulsi from seed for 3 years. And I have failed 3 years in a row. But year 4 is my year. And I want to tell you what I did different. So with a lot of herb seeds, you don't want to bury them. When you plant a vegetable seed, you know, sometimes you'll like put your seed in there about an inch deep. With herb seeds, you don't want them deep. In fact, a lot of them, you don't want to bury them at all. They need light exposure to germinate. So instead, you just scatter the seed on top of your cup and pat it down. Now, if you do this and then you water, what's going to happen? Those seeds are going to move and it's going to mess up your germination. So you need to water from the bottom. So my seeds here are sitting in a tray. Let me hold it up so you can see what I'm talking about here. Oh, it's kind of heavy. So you see they're in this tray. And when I'm going to water my herbs, I am never going to pour my water from over the top. I'm going to pour water in the tray in the bottom, and then through the little holes in the bottom of my cups, they will soak up however much water they need. And that way, we don't displace all those little seeds on top, and we give them a fighting chance to kind of germinate and get established. So that was the first thing I did different. The second thing I did different is I prayed over these seeds. And I know some of you might laugh at that, but let me just tell you why. So, you know, Tulsi is an herb that is used religiously around a lot of the world. And as a Christian, we believe that all plants were given by God for His purposes, and every plant has a purpose, right? And Tulsi is one in my house that has been a huge part of our healing story. For Josh, Tulsi changed everything. And so it's one I really want in my garden. I've bought Tulsi plants so that I can grow it, but I've never been able to grow it from seed. So I sowed it differently. I watered from the bottom, and then the seed pack, this is crazy, y'all. I bought these seeds from a company that I have never seen this stuff from. And the seed pack actually said, hold your Tulsi lights up to the sun and ohm. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, ohm. I don't even know how to do it. Christian girls don't ohm. And it was like, you have to do that step or they won't germinate. I read that and it made me so mad because I've been trying to grow this from seed for years, and I am not doing that because I do not believe the sun, I do not believe any sound frequency is going to activate this little seed. I think the power of God activates this seed, and He tells it whether or not to grow. And so instead of holding it up to the light and saying Om, I literally cradled these little seeds in my hand and I just prayed. And I asked God to bless these and turn this into medicine that would help my husband and medicine that would bless your families as I make teas for you. And I want you to look. It germinated just fine without all that woo-woo stuff because our God is good and kind and He gives us exactly what we need. So do not let the woo-woo side of herbalism discourage you from learning and growing. Do it anyway, but do it in a way that gives honor to God. And now every time I use this Tulsi for a local client who comes to me with a medicinal need, or every time I make tea with it, I'm going to remember that, and God's going to get the glory. This is another one. Look, got another little Tulsi. It's just got 1, 2, 3 little sprouts in it. So anyway, that's a prime example of, finicky herb growing directions. Keep the main thing the main thing. You don't have to do anything crazy, but praying over your seeds is never a bad idea because we want to commit the harvest to the Lord from the beginning, right? So lots and lots of things growing. You'll get to see and know all of these plants over the summer because you'll be with me as we plant them in the garden, as we grow them and harvest them, and we make remedies from them. Really excited about all the things we're going to grow together this summer. But I want you to know that growing from seed can save you money, can give you tons and tons of plants, many of them that will come back year after year after year once they're established. So it's well worth learning this skill. And listen, you don't have to have a big fancy greenhouse like the one you see me standing in. I'm so thankful for my little greenhouse. Josh built this for me. And he did it using old windows that he found on Facebook Marketplace. And this has been my little hideout for the last few years, and I love it. But I want you to know you don't have to have a greenhouse. You can use a sunny window sill. You can use LED grow lights inside. You could build a small cold frame outside. There are options that don't require big structural builds, so don't let my infrastructure intimidate you out of growing herbs. This is just because I'm obsessed and doing a whole lot of it. So remember, growing from seed saves you money, gives you access to a whole lot more varieties, and it doesn't have to be scary. In fact, because it's so inexpensive, you can experiment without feeling guilty about wasting a lot of money in the process. So no matter what you're growing this year, whether you're growing a vegetable garden or a flower garden or an herb garden, or you're someone like me that just mixes it all together and thinks it works best that way, grow from seed, give it a try. Just see what happens. And even if you fail, it's going to give you a starting point to go back and troubleshoot. And next year, you'll nail it. Just like I nailed the Tulsi finally after 3 years of trying. We had to troubleshoot and work it out. So don't give up. Invest the time into learning to grow from seed. And if you need a little help figuring out your herb garden, what to grow, how to go about this, how to build a home apothecary, how to dry the herbs you grow, all that information is in my book, The Everyday Herbalist, and I'll link it for you below. And if you don't have space for a garden, I hear this comment a lot. I wish I had room to grow. I don't have a big yard. I don't have a place for a garden, but I want to use herbs. So what do? If that's you, I want to encourage you, number one, source your herbs from somewhere trusted and make sure they're grown organically. And don't just take people's word for it, like look into it and know who you're buying herbs from. And shameless plug here, we have an herb shop. We don't sell all the varieties because there's way too many. We'll be adding more this year as we grow new things, but we do have over 24 herbs in stock grown organically here on our farm. Anything I can't grow here, I source from other farms and I research and I make sure they're grown the way I would grow them. And then we also have tea blends. So I make so much stuff from all this goodness. We've got teas to help you sleep, a cup of calm for anxiety support, gentle cleanse tea to help with inflammation. There's endless options. So grab you some tea. Let's learn more about herbs, and I'll see you next week, because by then it will be time to move some of these plants out into the garden, and we're about to have a really fun spring together. See you next week.